I paint a model without directly looking at it? That sounds like a challenge. When I paint on camera, I have to center myself up and then start painting while I'm looking at my model. But what will happen is I'll end up drifting off the camera. So what I want to do is train myself to check my monitor more to make sure that I'm properly centered. Well, that's where this challenge comes in, because what I'm going to do is block my view with this piece of paper so that the only way I can see my model is through my monitor. A little while ago, I painted this Alien Hives warrior on a stream I did in a Discord, as practice for the Toxico Rex I painted the weekend right after. But now that it's done, it needs a base, so I've also printed up some Alien Hive bases. My plan for this video is to show you how I paint bases relatively quickly with some simple techniques. You know, something useful so this video isn't just too clickbaity. Then after, try and paint a similar base for the challenge using only my monitor, meaning I won't be able to look at the base directly. However, my caveat is that my palette will be visible to me, since I think it's already going to be hard enough without having to mix paints through a lens as well. For most of the whole project, I'll be using a large number 2 brush, keeping it easy. I'm also not going to do a whole lot of mixing and just use pre-mixed colors. All of these will be from the Scale Artist line, along with an ink. Starting with burnt umber, this will be the base coat for the organic ground parts. Any dark brown should work, but seeing as how this is organic looking material, you could step this up yourself by adding some purple or red to give it that organic matter feel. But since I'm keeping it easy, just one light base coat of this, along with a second coat of it after it dries. Here's the only place that I'm going to defer to a different brush, since I need to dry brush and I don't want to ruin a good one doing it. Using a raw sienna to highlight, I load some onto the tip of my brush without watering it down any, then wipe it off on a paper towel. Any dark yellow would work for this. With constant pressure, I flick it back and forth quickly over the base to get it to highlight the textures there over everything I painted brown. Adding pearl gray to the palette, I mix that with the raw sienna. White also would work here, I just plan to use the gray with a few other steps too. Then with the dry brush still, just pick out a few raised areas to dry brush over to give some highlight to those spots. Last step for the organic dirt is to just give it a good wash to help darken and blend everything together. I use Argrax Earthshade, but any wash should be fine. Just if it's more of an intense one, like a contrast, dilute it with a bit of medium or water first. I paint this on much like a base coat, trying to keep my brush strokes even and not putting on too much. Just enough should settle into the valleys and edges. Next up is the barnacle looking egg thingies. And to save some hassle, I'm painting both the inside and the outside the same base, though they will look a little different when I paint them in the end. Using a reddish brown, dark brown ochre, again from the Scale Artist line, giving them a solid base coat inside and out by applying it thin down twice. I'll start with the insides of the eggs, as I think for when I can't look directly at them, edging them will be easier than trying to poke inside them. So I add some red ink to the palette and mix a bit into the brown, using that mixture just to give another thin base coat to the inside membranes of those eggs. When that dries fully, I add some of that pearl gray that was on the palette just to quickly highlight the centers of the craters. Just a bit of stippling in the middle of each of them, and since in this case they dried pretty quickly, I added another bit of gray to the last mix and did the very centers quickly to finish highlighting them. And the last thing for the middle of these pimples, I add a bit more of the red ink to my base and thin it out just a little bit more. Then I use this to glaze the insides of them again, making them a bit more red and a bit darker from where I ended the highlights. For the outsides, I keep it simple and just take the two colors already on my palette, the base brown and the gray, mix them together, and just start highlighting the edges of the opening, stippling down from the edge a bit, and sometimes near the base if there's enough texture. Then, by adding just a little more gray, go around highlighting again. I do the rims of the eggs and try and pick out a little bit of texture where there's lots of it on the model. Hopefully, since these edges are quite thick, they won't be too hard to follow with the tip of the brush when I'm not watching directly. And lastly, I bring out my old friend Argrax Earthshade again, and do some thin washes just between each of the eggs to add more to those shadows, but also let that texture near the base of them stand out a little bit more. The last part will be all the stonework, adding green gray to my palette and mixing it with a bit of the pearl gray. I like to use colors to darken things just to keep some saturation, but a black and white would work for the stone just as well. I lay this down as a base layer on the stone parts. I add a bit more gray to the mix to lighten it. The general idea is to outline each stone fully with a translucent highlight, but also to mark it up along the way, adding scratches and stippling along the edges where I painted the edges to blend those into the rest of the stone better. Another bit of gray and another highlight. For this I switched to another base I've been working on, as it has a bit more stonework to actually show it on. This time just picking out some of the areas that came out the brightest in the last step and adding to them. So I'm not doing full outlines and scratches, but boosting and lighting up some of the lines that are already there, following them as closely as I can. But it's not a big deal if this layer gets its own scratches too. And the very last step is to filter the stones to be different colors a little bit, so they're not quite one unified color. So I'm breaking out the Nuln oil for this, but leaving my palette open, as I'll mix the Nuln oil into different colors already around to make the filters. So the yellows, the browns, the green-gray, all getting used with a light layer over the stones just to make each of them a different hue in the end. So other than just painting around the rim, this is pretty much done. So now the paper goes up, and we get to see if I can do that all over again without directly looking at it. So it'll just be the same process that I did with the other one, starting with a dark brown wash. Now, first thing I do is kind of locate my device underneath back here so I can see it and I can kind of see what I'm doing in the brush, tip of my brush, but I need to be able to feel it, so my pinky kind of acts as a guider there. See, the other thing about this is it's 2D, not 3D, so I don't know how deep I'm going. Oh no, angles. This is quite... So I might have to rotate this more just to get the right angles. Kind of rotate the model instead of the brush. The question is, should I... Well, it looks like I've already got the sides there. I didn't even realize I did that because it's so flat. I'm not doing too bad, I don't think. I mean, this is just the base layer. But yeah, you can see there, I kind of thought I was going one way and then it turned out to be the other way. And the reflections in the paint kind of... I can't tell what's reflection. Well, I guess if I move it around, that'll help. So I know what I've missed and what I haven't. This one, hopefully, should just be a nice quick basing, just to get some of those other parts that are a little light with. But luckily these are actually quick to do. Painting nothing. So what I end up doing is I end up just adjusting my movement just a little bit to the side, and it ends up like what I feel is just a little bit, but it ends up being way more than that. The main problem I think I'm going to have with the dry brushing is not actually the brush itself. It's got the long handle, and the camera's actually quite close, so if this gets shaky, I'm sorry, because it's probably because I hit the camera. Let's see if I can do it from the side, maybe. Get rubbing. Ooh, that looks like too much. Too late now. This is probably the easiest point. What I'm mostly worried about will be later when I'm trying to do the brickwork. Now the question is what edges do I pick out? Obviously this one. Let's just see where my brush goes. So probably here is fine. The other thing that's a little weird is I'm so focused on the base on my monitor as if this is what I'm painting from that I'm probably making weird faces even though I can see myself. Basically the hardest part right now is telling if I'm too high or too low. It's kind of, I've got to go in and make contact with my model so I know where it is, and then I can go from there and it's not too bad. This I think is actually going to be quite difficult because I want to do an even layer, but I have to be able to get it to the model. Let's see if going sideways helps. So we're on it there. So I want this even, but I can't really make even brush strokes or flat brush strokes. It's also hard to tell as if I'm running out of the wash on my brush. I mean, I can see it. I can see it on the monitor there, how much is left in my brush, but normally when you can look at it directly, you kind of have a much better idea. Whereas I think because this is going to dampen everything, it's going to look like I'm painting everything, but it might just be wet without actually getting much pigment on it. So I think the easiest way to do these might just be to use the base as a guide, get it in the middle, and then go out from there. Twisting the holder to help me see exactly the outside. So yeah, this is the interesting part here. It's because I can't see the full surface of it because it goes down. I can also see that my point is disappearing there. I think I'm getting it. Did I get that side? Close enough, maybe? Gotta be careful that I don't go too far outside. I think this one's gonna be a slow and steady process more than anything. That was just one, and that took a lot of effort to try and do. The other hard part is knowing just how much I'm pushing on my brush. So with my fingers I can kind of feel the pressure that I'm putting down on it, but as I'm watching the bristles I can see them kind of bending a little bit too much sometimes, and I'm pushing really hard. This is why I'll end up doing 2 coats, is I feel like with this one I'm just gonna miss some spots. I brute forced it. I won't say too much about this because it's pretty much the exact same thing I did last time. I'm only going to do the outside. Inside gets its own in a little bit. Trying to look at it closer. My natural response to pull it closer to the camera. So we'll just adjust the focus so that I can do that. I think if I aim this just at a V kind of to the camera, I'll be able to get this right in the middle and not worry too much about the edges since I'll be going over those after. I can't touch it. Go in. There we go. I knew I was on target, but I didn't know when it was going to touch the model. So I got to get the point on my brush, but also keep it while trying to dot the middle of the insides of these. I think once I get it on there, it'll be fine. I can stipple kind of just by moving my hand back and forth a bit. This first one's not too bad because you just have to kind of push down when you get it in there. But for the second one, obviously since it's a highlight, I don't want to go as heavy. So can I get this? So I'm kind of trying to angle my brush up, just so it's going straight down. Looks like I got highlights in them at the very least. And this one I don't think will be too hard. I just don't want it on the outside to stain those outside parts. Just get it in there and make sure it goes everywhere. So I think for the highlights on these, it won't be too bad if I stay parallel to them, essentially. So kind of find that line, get it around, and then stipple around it. Kind of shove the model into it there. Let's see if I can do stippling lines. I kind of feel like the paint on my brush is dry. The other beauty of this is that my patterns are going to be truly random because I have no idea which way I'm going sometimes. So keeping the brush parallel like I am there actually worked really well, just forgetting the edges. Now I feel like I can put it up to get the stippling. As far as I can tell on the camera, that looks quite alright. Alright, so with this one, I just want to get kind of these top edges, and the accidental stippling is probably fine. Like you can see kind of how I end up drifting off camera is you want to pull the model towards your brush. Got some on the rim. Yeah, getting between them is actually quite disorienting almost because I'm trying to hit a valley while I can only see it in 2D. Once it's in there, it's not so bad. I can drag it, but trying to get it just in there. So last thing here will be these stones. Now I purposely chose this base because it had the least amount on them while still having some, so I'd have some of a challenge. I do want to keep that shade that I put on there between these, so this will be the most precise base layer I'll have to do, I think. However, because they're flat, it shouldn't be too impractical to do. One of the weird things about this kind of flat perspective is trying to figure out what's a stone or not. Like, is this a stone? I can't tell. Let's rotate it and see if that gives me any information. Then I think there is one here. So I'm gonna try and cover up most of the gray while leaving a bit of that brown. So I just added a little bit more gray, and now I gotta try and get the outline of these. What's weird is I'm doing exactly the same thing that I would do when I'm painting while looking at it, is trying to bring it closer to my face for an edge highlight. So I'm bringing it closer to the camera instead. Oh. Am I not touching? There we go, I think. I don't know. Go on, get on there. So by the end here, I think the outline is just gonna mess me up. So I'm just kind of adding the scratches instead, or trying to, and stippling, because the stones are so small, I don't really need that outline. Because I'm trying to be so light, I don't get much pressure feedback from the brush itself. So essentially all I'm doing here is visual feedback, just knowing that the paint went down at some point, because I can see it went down. So this one has a bit of yellow in it. Let's see if I can pick out just a couple stones. So let's say this one, and this one back here. Alright, and lastly, a bit of this red-brown on whatever is left, which I think is just this inside one here, and this one here. Alright, let's go compare them. So when I got a good look at the final base with my naked eye, I was actually impressed how close some of it was to the first one that I could see directly. The eggs almost looked actually identical, other than the one I couldn't look at was a bit darker on the inside. It was very tough to gauge the color tone through a lens. So that's why, when I paint for you guys, I'm not specific about the colors I use generally, this video being the exception. Because I think you're better served by, instead of saying Gal Vorbak Red, since that only applies to one paint line which you might not even have the full collection, I instead prefer to say something like Cool, Dark, Purple, Red, which gives you a basic recipe to get you close with whatever paints you have. Back to the bases, I did go a bit heavy with the wash on the sightless one, so it came out a bit darker, but since the dry brush went off without a hitch really, they're not too dissimilar. The stones actually came out a bit better than I thought they did from what I could see through the camera. I really wanted to get a magnified and up close view with them, but because I was looking through a lens, I was stuck with my single view. But since I painted them wildly to begin with, not being able to see just helped with the texture. One thing I thought would happen is that after I did it for a little bit, I'd get used to painting through the lens. But even after doing it for a while, it was still hard to find my depth, and I had to put my hand on my holder just to figure out where I was most of the time. But overall it wasn't too disorienting, other than in a few spots, and I could track my movements well enough through the camera, which for a base like this was good enough. If you want to see an unedited version of me painting through the lens, check the link in the description below. Thanks for coming with me on this journey, and I hope to see you on the next one. Please subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this one, or just other fun things to do with painting miniatures. And until next time, enjoy your own painting journey.